All right. Welcome back to Blast of Strangeness, episode 7 of the podcast. And you're right. Tonight we're actually, that's right. You're correct if you read that, their title. No liars. Nothing I ever said on the podcast was a lie as far as episode 7. And episode 7 is also a Q&A. I know, right? I thought it was time for a Q&A. So, hold on 1 second here. So now, what usually we do here on the podcast is, well, before we get into it, hold on. Welcome to the live. Okay. All right. So, just make sure before anything you read the disclaimer up above, even before you hit the subscribe button. All right? Okay, good. Okay, so now, so what the podcast is actually about is I actually talk about bad educated mentor figures, and I also talk about paranormal encounter experiences, and I also talk about alien abduction encounter experiences as well on the podcast. So, episode 7 of this podcast you're watching right now is in real time. So now, does anyone have any questions about anything like I just said of what the podcast is actually about? Anyone? Feel free to ask. Ask your question. But if you're going to ask your question, I would actually prefer you to actually email the question, and I can actually answer your question if you email the podcast. So now, also be sure to check out episode 6 of the podcast, because there was an episode last night of the podcast which a lot of you did not see. That's only because there was a change in the schedule as a little surprise to all viewers, so that's why. So now, does anyone have any questions about the alien abduction experience encounter, or the paranormal experience encounter, or the bad mentor educated figure? Any questions on any of that, or any questions about the how I can spot a scam from a mile away? Yeah, I'm just wondering if anyone has any questions about that. Please just feel free to email the podcast, and the email address should be somewhere either in my community post or or in my YouTube description somewhere. So like I said, if anyone has any questions, anything about that, please email the podcast, and I'll read your email live right now. Anyone? Okay. Oh, and by the way, all questions will actually have to be emailed in order to get the answer for the Q&A. So if you want to ask questions, please just email. Yes, actually. That question I can answer, actually. Yes. Of course I'm live. Hello. Why would I not be? This is also being recorded in real time, too. So, anyone want to ask a question or anything about what the podcast is actually about? That's interesting. Okay, you can email your question and it'll get answered depending on if I like the question. Although this podcast did run into a little bit of a problem, actually. Just because there was a disclaimer, apparently that's when there were some issues in one of the previous episodes for the podcast. So, you should all probably know by now what the podcast is actually about. So the podcast is basically about where I talk about bad educated mentors, figures, and paranormal encounter experiences and alien abduction encounter experiences. Things mostly related to that is what the podcast is actually about. So if anyone and I can also spot a scam from a mile away. Does anyone else have any questions on that? Wow, that's interesting. But yeah, if you actually watch the podcast, episode 6 was actually live last night, which none of you didn't actually see, which I do. Actually, I don't know why. It was just one of those things. It's probably because the Q&A was probably turned off. That's probably why. And YouTube last night was having some type of issue to where it wasn't letting me go live at all. It took several tries to get it to actually work. And then it decided to work. So it may have something to do with those two things. And yes, this podcast is actually in a very small space, but that's okay. This podcast is actually a one-man show. I have had a couple guests on here before, but they were just silent guests. And somehow they made their way onto the podcast. I know it, right? Yeah, that's quite interesting how they made their way onto the podcast. So anyway, if you had watched one of the other episodes of the podcast to where I actually did really have an alien abduction encounter years ago when I was probably around 12 years old. It just one night, it was just one of those things that did end up happening at a rental property that I was living in at the time. It was a 1970s mobile home trailer is where it actually happened and took place. And it did happen, but a lot of people are trying to act like I'm such a little liar and that never actually happened to me when it actually did. Yes, it did happen, but just because it happened doesn't mean that I need to go report it. After the way everything had happened with the whole ordeal, was actually just very, very horrible. So therefore, yes, even though it did happen, I didn't want it to be documented or have TV cameras in front of my face at the time. So therefore, that's actually probably why it never wound up on something like cable or anything like that. So, so I had lived there probably another two or 3 years after that had happened. And then I ended up moving out of there and moved quite far away after that. And I never had that happen again after moving far away. But nowadays I moved out even further away. So I literally live quite far away. And a lot of the time, I just do not want to remember what actually had happened with that whole ordeal. But unfortunately, a lot did happen with it. I was actually abducted at the time, and I was actually sitting on the couch. It was wintertime, and I was watching TV one night, and I'm pretty sure it was a later airing of Jeopardy that I was watching. And I was dragged off the couch, dragged into the kitchen area, over by where my table was towards the back door, the kitchen. And then these two alien-looking creatures ended up embedding this big blue stone deep into my foot. And then they put me back on the couch like nothing had happened. And I was like, okay, that was interesting. But like I said, though, that's not all that had happened. So I did actually have that big blue stone out of my big toe the next morning. And oh boy, did it hurt. I could tell you that much. It hurt while it was in there. It also hurt coming out. So therefore, after that, that's why I do not want to try to remember any of that actually ever happening. Because that whole ordeal was just horrible when it had happened to me at the time. And then when I was living in that old 1970s mobile home trailer at the time that was a rental, the bedroom that I slept in. Now, if I was alone in that bedroom, every night in that bedroom, the electrical panel box that was just updated, or the brand new one at the time, every night around the same time, I would hear this strange noise, and for some reason, it sounded like somebody was actually throwing a quarter at it, and then I would hear the breaker go off. Now, it only happened in that bedroom if I was alone in there sleeping. Now, if my sibling was in that bedroom sleeping, or if we were both in there sleeping, it would not happen. It would only happen when I was alone in that bedroom. So now there was something else that had happened there one night too when I was alone there. I had the bedroom door one time slightly open one night because I knew I was going to have to get up and go to the bathroom at one point because I was watching TV, and I said to myself, as soon as the commercial comes on, I guarantee you I'm going to have to get up and go to the bathroom. So, needless to say, all of a sudden, I'm watching TV. All of a sudden, I hear someone say to me, "Hey, turn off the TV." I'm like, excuse me? So, obviously, I get up, I look, I started looking around like, what was that? no one's there. And I was like, what? Okay, wait a minute. What do you mean no one's there? Someone was there because someone said it. Yeah, now that was very strange. So the next morning, I asked everyone, I'm like, hey, did anyone say that last night, like walking by the bedroom? And everybody said no. I said, okay, all right. Oh, so then around the time I had just gotten a newer computer with a newer operating system at the time for the upgrade for my old operating system one. So all of a sudden, in that old 1970s mobile home trailer, one night I'm on the computer. This became an occurrence after a while. It always felt like somebody was standing behind me, watching me. So I'd look behind me and nobody would be there. And now I thought that was strange too. That happened every night there up until I moved out of there. So, the other time when this happened, the last night it had happened. So finally it got to the point where I moved out of there and then moved far away. And then once I had moved and was settled into a new place, I'm on the computer one night and I just get ready to look behind me. And I said, there's nothing behind me. And I already know that. So I looked behind me. Sure enough, nope. I said, wow. But the place that I ended up moving into at the time, did not actually have those electrical issues or those problems. The place that I ended up moving into was another 1970s mobile home trailer. It was also a rental, but the only difference with that one, it was just a year newer than the previous one at the time. But the previous one, that wasn't exactly all modern yet. The more modern one, yeah, I mean, even though it was old, it didn't have all those problems. It hardly had any problems. But now the previous one had a lot of problems. But that ended up, at the time, the electrical panel box ended up being upgraded to a brand new, more modern one in there at the time, because the other one that was in there was old and outdated. But now the day we had moved in there, this is what I find strange to this day. The day we moved in there, we pull into the driveway during the day. We start unpacking the car. We walk in. We turn the lights on. I mind you, during the day, it's all of a sudden dark in there, even with the lights on. Yeah. Well, when that happened, I almost said, you know what? Maybe I shouldn't move in here. But I said, well, I guess we're stuck here now for a while. And then, after I moved out of there, that all had stopped, which was interesting. That all had actually come to a stop after I had moved out of there. So then, this really old apartment that I had lived in at one time, that was real old. It used to be an old funeral home, and it was also an old doctor's office at one time. And the doctor actually passed away in the bedroom that I had, where my bed actually was, where I would actually sleep, in that one bedroom. Yeah, that was weird. Weird things would happen there too. Like, one night, I had the bedroom door there opened, and you could see into like part of the kitchen. And it looked like somebody was standing right there at night. It would stand there and just watch me, which I do not know why. But then again, whatever. But that apartment was weird too. So one time at that apartment, all of a sudden, all these quarters suddenly just started falling from the ceiling. And I said, okay. I knew at the time, like, I knew exactly what that was and why that had happened. And I said, okay, well, time to move out of there. But see, I had moved out of that old mobile home 1970s trailer. It was a rental at the time. One other time, when I had moved into the apartment, but I lived in the apartment for a couple of weeks. And then after those couple of weeks were up, I actually had no choice but to move back in to that 1970s mobile home trailer and live there for several years up until I moved out and found another trailer that was available for rent at the time. But then it got to the point to where eventually the one trailer that I ended up moving into that was for rent that ended up becoming available, I had lived there for a couple of years and then ended up moving into a smaller one nearby that was a 1950s to 1960s mobile home trailer. And so I had lived there for quite a while. I want to say I had lived there for about a few months to almost a year. Then I had moved out of there and ended up moving into this house that was for rent nearby in the area. And this house, well, yeah, I mean, it was a rental house. It was actually built in 1965, from what I had found out. And then it had an add-on at some point in it. So, anyway, this place, actually, something was weird about this place, too. That had some very strange paranormal activity. All types of weird things would take place there. Like, one time, there was a soldier one time walking up and down the road one morning. It walked by the place I was living, poked its head in the driveway, smiled, and then left, and just disappeared and was gone. That road, come to find out, that road is actually creepy at night during the dark, especially at night when it's dark out, you know? And I actually had a very creepy experience on that road one night while walking. Yep. That's true. Then, that house, also one time, we actually had seen a spirit walking around in another part of the house. Yeah, that happened too. And one night in that house, the one area had this like loft area of the house that it had. The light in there actually decided to shut off one night by itself. Now that's strange. Something turned that light off. Something was not too happy about it being on for some reason. In one of the other bedrooms in that house, there was this hole, like this like crawl-looking space thing. We don't know what it actually ever was. There was nothing really over it. So we didn't know what it was. But we think it was actually the what was it? We think it was actually the opening of the portal where spirits go through. We actually really think it was. because this did not look like a normal crawl space area to lead down into a basement or a cellar. No, this looked completely different. You would actually have to see it, and then you would say to yourself, wow, that looks weird. I know, that's what I said. So now, we had moved out of there eventually. And now, the only reason I'm going to go back real quick to that other 1970s mobile home trailer that was just a year newer and more modern at the time, we actually did end up moving out of there because it was actually, it wasn't haunted or anything like that. It just happened to be at the time in a trailer park, and it was just surrounded by bad neighbors. So that's why we ended up moving out of there. And that's why we ended up moving into a smaller trailer that was a 1950s to 1960s. So we moved into a trailer that was built in either sometime in the 1950s or the 1960s. Either way, I guess. That place was old too. That place was strange though. Like every day around the same time, around 1 or 2 in the afternoon, Monday through Friday, I mind you, the back door in the hallway would suddenly just come open by itself every afternoon between 1 in the afternoon or 2 in the afternoon. Although sometimes it would literally happen after 1:30 in the afternoon. We always thought that was strange too. So then, there's more to this. So then, like I said, that would always happen, which we thought was really weird. But eventually we ended up moving out. We moved out of there, then moved into that 1965 rental house that was just slightly bigger at the time, you know. We had lived there for a few years, but we did end up moving out of there. Obviously, you know, majority of them were all rentals, including that. Well, we had moved out of there at the time because the landlord was one of them slumlord landlords. So that's why we ended up moving out of there. We were just like, you know what, forget this. Bye. See ya. Well, let me tell you something with that. That place at one point, the place ended up needing a lot of repairs. Because for some reason in there, the heat in the wintertime to heat the place, it actually had stopped working in the middle of winter. So that needed to be fixed. Something else there needed to be fixed too. He would not fix it whatsoever. He was also weird. And I know to this day, I think he actually had hidden cameras set up in there too. Because it's awfully strange how when we weren't there or something would happen, like one day the water suddenly wasn't working. I thought, interesting. Oh, so one day he was there one day. Randomly one day. I'm there one day home, you know. And I said to myself, I have awfully strange suspicion that the landlord has been here for God only knows what reason. So anyway, needless to say, come to find out, my suspicions were right. Oh, he was there, all right. So, he didn't know that I was there one day. So, I'm there one day, you know. I happen to look out the window through the blinds. He pulls in the driveway. And I thought to myself, that's strange. I said, what is he up to now? He was walking around the property. I said to myself, oh, you have got to be kidding me. Really? So I called my mother at the time because she had to go run a few errands. So I call her on my cell phone and I'm like, hey, you know, this wacky landlord was just here and I don't know why. walking around the property acting really strange. I said, huh, that's interesting. Then, one day, I mind you, I'm there one day, it was summertime. I'm there one day in the bedroom with the air conditioner on, watching TV one day because it was really hot outside and I did not feel like going out in the heat. And I actually couldn't because of a medical condition at the time, which I do still have, but it has improved actually. So therefore I could not be outside for long periods of time, unfortunately, in the hot sun. I mean, I could be outside, but unfortunately, I cannot be out in the sun for too long. If I'm out in the sun for too long, I actually have to go in and be where it's cool. So I could not be outside due to that reason. He literally thought that I was supposed to be outside taking care of all these little things, I mind you, that were already taken care of. And I said to myself, excuse me, you're going to tell me what I should be doing? When first of all, it's summertime, it's hot as hell outside. You want me out there with the medical condition, with the problem that I have, where I cannot be outside for too long out in the hot sun? Is there something wrong with you? Yeah, there was something wrong with him, all right. And the funny thing is, he had to come over one time and fix something because we had to call him. And so what ended up happening was there was an issue with the water. And so I ended up leaving because, I was highly annoyed. So I left for a couple hours that day. So later that afternoon, just slightly before dinner time, I went home to this rental house. All of a sudden, so the water was still having a problem, so we called him. He comes over that night. He fixes he walks in, starts bitching at me. He says, well, I drove by earlier today. I saw you outside. You were messing around with that water thing out there. And blah, blah, blah. I said, okay, excuse me. First of all, and second of all, I was not here. First and second of all, I left early that morning and I did not get back till late in the afternoon. So you think I was here when I wasn't? You got something wrong majorly with you. Oh yeah, he tried to accuse me of all this stuff. At that point, I just thought to myself, you're going to fix this water problem and you're going to get the hell out of here, is what you're going to do. I don't care if it's your rental property or not. Oh, he fixed the problem, all right. Then, come to find out the problem was his doings. He was the one that was out screwing with the damn thing. Because what I did that day was I randomly had a friend drive me by there in a car that he did not know. All of a sudden, I see him pulling into that driveway, doing something to the water so it would not work. But yet he had nerve to accuse me of it. Yeah. Come on. Really? Seriously? So, yeah, that was another issue. So, like I said, that's half the reason why we ended up moving out of that property. And then eventually we moved into another place for about a year or two. Moved out of there, bought our house. That was actually haunted. Oh, yeah. That's probably going to be a whole nother story for next week's for episode 8 of the podcast. I will see you all in the next episode. Bye.